I'm sorry, everyone. I'm sorry, Rentaro. I'm sorry, Suichi. You stayed silent this whole time because you realized it already, right? But you can't do that. It may be the end of me, but I want my wish to. I'm giving it to you, Suichi! From now on, you're going to carry on my wish. You're going to protect everyone. Hi guys, I'm kyokaxiavon and welcome back to my channel. Thank you all for the support on my Women in Danganronpa videos thus far. I have been in the Danganronpa fandom for a very long time now, but I haven't really engaged much with the fandom until now, and it's been so nice to discuss the games in the comments. If you haven't seen the first two parts, the links for them will be in the description. This video is coming out a bit later than the first two, and that's mostly because life has been super busy as of recent. Also, I went to Miku Expo, which was pretty awesome. But now that I've touched grass for a bit, it's time to get back to Danganronpa. Now we're finally at the final game, V3. This game had an amazing soundtrack, a cool setting and nice graphics, but I do think the cast was a massive downgrade compared to the first two games. The issue I have with this game's cast isn't that I think the characters are bad, as none of them are. I just think that they were either overlooked or utilised in all the wrong ways in the story. Plus, the school they were trapped in was for troubled youth, and I feel like this is never mentioned in the game at all, even though this is such an interesting concept for a Danganronpa game. A killing game full of gifted juveniles? That's awesome! But unfortunately, it's not what we got. I'll get more into detail on that later, as before we fully dive into V3, I wanted to do a quick overview of the women from Despair Girls and the Future and Despair Arc animes. This video will have spoilers for pretty much the entire series, so if you don't want to be spoiled on the games, then go and play them and watch this video later. And before you ask, no, I'm not talking about monophony because I hate the monocurbs with my entire being. If you want to get straight to V3, then there is a timestamp on screen for when the V3 section of this video begins. And also, don't forget to subscribe. With all of that out the way, let's begin. I wasn't sure whether I was even going to talk about these characters in the first place, but some of you in the comments were interested and I wanted to at least briefly discuss them, so here we are. Let's start with Despair Girls, the only Danganronpa game that is a third-person shooter. Despair Girls takes place in Toa City and is set between the first and second games. You play as Komaru Naegi, the younger sister of Makoto, as she teams up with Toko Fukawa to save Tagami and the rest of the adults from the children who had taken over the city. I really love the concept for this game, and I think it adds a lot to the world building of the series, but it tackles some dark topics in pretty much the worst way possible. I won't go into details, but it is vile how they treat Kotoko's trauma, and don't even get me started with Haiji. Monika is an interesting character, one that is, however, used more for shock value than as a serious antagonist. Like, wow, the sweet looking girl in a wheelchair is actually the devil incarnate, that's so crazy. In all seriousness, I do think Monika was a fun antagonist who was a good foil for Komaru, as while she idolised Junko, Komaru deeply cared for her brother, but it's only thanks to Fukawa that she can find her own hope. I don't blame people for skipping this game, as you can follow the story of the main games without it, and as mentioned prior, it has poor representation of certain themes, but I think there's still a lot of good in this game that is greatly overlooked. Komaru is our only real female protagonist, and I love her journey throughout the game, as while she has a similar journey to her brothers, the main themes are different, as for Makoto, he had to learn that his biggest strength was his connection with others, while Komaru's is more focused on the transition from childhood to adulthood. I also love Fukawa in this game, as while she had been in the first game, her story feels fully complete here, and I love how she's grown so much between these two games. It's a shame that there are so many strange moments in this game, but overall I'm glad they had a game focused on Komaru and Fukawa. Now, the Future and Despair animes are certainly interesting. I know a lot of people hate these animes, and believe me, I'm with you. But I don't think they're as bad as people say they are, especially Future Arc. I actually enjoyed Future Arc quite a bit, and generally the female characters in this arc are all really interesting, especially Ruruka and Seiko. They were childhood friends who had become enemies due to an incident that happened while they were at Hope's Peak, but it's clear that Ruruka is completely in the wrong here. She cares for those who benefit her, and selfishly she wants these people all for herself. In the end, She's alone because of her doubtful nature, but from her death, we can assume that she had a lot of insecurities that fueled her terrible decisions. I love Iruka and how flawed she is. Even though her death is so tragic, it is certainly deserved. I also love how we get to see more of these characters in Despair arc, such as Yukizome, the homeroom teacher of the 77th class of Hope's Peak. Her early death in Future arc was a shocking moment that was made even better by her large amounts of screen time in Despair arc. While I wish her brainwashing and all of the brainwashing in Despair arc was done in a far more interesting way, I still really liked her role in the story and how she was still relevant even after her death. While Asahina and Kirigiri didn't have major roles in Future arc, I really enjoyed their presence and it was nice to see how much closer they had become since their first game. Generally, I think the animes had some really interesting new characters, though other elements such as the brainwashing and the fact that the whole of Danganronpa 2's cast was basically just resurrected unharmed, did make the animes in general less enjoyable. Like Despair Girls, these animes are completely skippable, but I do love how they explore the world outside of the killing games, and I think the female characters introduced in them are mostly pretty great. But like I said before, I really don't blame people for skipping these, as the main 3 games are definitely better overall, but I think they at least deserve their flowers. Plus, I really like the songs from both Despair Girls and the anime, so that's always a plus. Now that I've discussed them, let's get back to V3 with its first killer and protagonist, Kaede Akamatsu.
My name is Kaede Akamatsu.
I'll be honest, I really like Kaede, but the amount of disappointment I felt when it was revealed that Saihara was actually the protagonist of this game was astronomical. That being said, I do like Saihara, but I found Kaede to be a far more compelling protagonist. Kaede is the ultimate pianist. She spent her whole childhood playing piano, and she quickly rose to fame as a piano prodigy. This, of course, is a fabricated backstory made by Team Danganronpa, but we at least know from her audition videos that the real Kaede had little to no hope in humanity. Kaede wakes up in a locker and is chased into the school gym by the Exisals. Inside, there are other students who seem excited when they realise what's happening. Before the player can catch on to what's going on, the Monokubs give them new outfits and use the first flashback light, giving Kaede the memories of her talent mentioned prior. Now, a Danganronpa killing game can begin. Kaede quickly tries to keep the group together, as she believed that if they worked together, they would be able to escape. This is immediately challenged by the minigame in the manhole, where the player must get through a difficult platformer to exit the killing game. While you can beat this minigame, you must lose to progress the story. After multiple attempts, the students are exhausted and covered in injuries. Oma declares that Kaede is the reason that they're all feeling so much despair, as she was the one who got their hopes up. Kaede felt guilty, blaming herself for breaking up the group, but she is reassured by Kaito and Saihara, who still believe in her. The next day, Monokuma announces the motive for Chapter 3, the first blood perk. Dun dun dun! This meant that if there was a murder, a class trial wouldn't be held and the Blackened could leave the killing game. Kaede tries to encourage the group once more, but they seem a lot less convinced by her words. When one of the Monokubs accidentally destroys Monokuma, the group are relieved, thinking that the killing game was over. Kaede was hesitant, believing that the killing game wouldn't be done so easily, but this makes her classmates doubt her even more. She allows herself to cry when no one can see her, though Saihara visits her and reassures her that he believes in her. To show how much he trusts her, he shows her the hidden door he had found in the library. The next day, Monokuma returns and announces if there isn't a murder in 2 days, everyone will be killed. Kaede once again tries to motivate the group, but this falls on deaf ears. Kaede and Saihara discover that someone had used the door in the library, suggesting that the mastermind was among them. Saihara and Kaede make a plan to catch the mastermind, which involved placing cameras in the library. These cameras would take a picture when detected motion, and as a result, the mastermind would be caught red-handed. While retrieving the cameras, Kaede doubts whether their plan will work. With these thoughts clouding her mind, she also grabs a shot put ball. As she sets up the cameras in the library of Saihara, she leaves the vent open and purposely places the books on top of the bookcase in a staircase pattern. As well as this, she turns the flash on one of the cameras to lure the mastermind towards the bookcase near the vent. As they wait for the sensor to go off, Saihara opens up to Kaede, but she reassures him, saying that she doesn't feel scared as he's here with her. They both believed in each other when they needed it most. When the sensor goes off, Saihara swiftly leaves. Kaede uses this opportunity to start her plan. She pushes the shot put ball through the vent, and as a result, Amami is killed. As she was the first killer, Kaede had the opportunity to take the first blood perk, but she refused as she wanted to escape with everyone. During the trial, Saihara, thanks to Kaide's encouragement, deduces that Kaide was the killer. It's during this moment that the player's perspective shifts from Kaide to Saihara, making him the actual protagonist of V3. After the votes are cast, Kaide informs the group of her plan to kill the mastermind, and Saihara feels guilty as he believed that it was his fault that she did what she did. In her final moments, she reassures Saihara that she believes in him, and then she's dragged to her execution, Der Flualser, where she is being held by her neck while her feet play notes on the large piano. As the tempo of the song increases, Kaide is in more pain until the song finally ends and she's hanging lifelessly. The case of the piano slams shut, crushing her dead body. Kaide's death motivates Saihara to believe in himself and take over her role in the group. Saihara was now determined to escape the killing game with everyone to honour Kaide. I talked about this a bit in my Women in Danganronpa 2 video, but there is a lot of the fridging trope in this series, and honestly, this is the trope at its worst. It was a great moment for Saihara's character, but I really wish that Kaide was the real protagonist of V3. Before the game released, she was advertised as the first female protagonist of the mainline Danganronpa games, and I love how different she is from the other protagonists thus far, but instead she was replaced by a character who is very similar to the Danganronpa protagonist we've already had. I don't dislike Saihara as a protagonist, but Kaide as a protagonist would have been so much more interesting, and I would have loved to see how her resolve would have developed throughout the game. While we only get Kaide in Chapter 1, I really enjoy her character, especially how her toxic positivity affects the group. I also love the tension she has with Oma, the first character to show disbelief in her words, and how this dynamic would have developed as the game went on. It makes me wish that the twist was reversed, with Saihara being the killer and Kaide becoming the protagonist instead. That being said, I do appreciate Kaide's character for what it is, and I really like how much it contrasts with her real self. Kaide was a really intriguing character who, much like Amami, left the story far too soon.
As a maid, it is a great honor to serve the nation itself.
Next is Chapter 2's killer, Kurumi Tojo. Kurumi is the ultimate maid, though in the second trial it's revealed that she was essentially the mayor of Japan. She remembers this thanks to her motive video, which was conveniently given to her. She decided that she must escape the school so she could continue to serve her country, no matter the consequences. She decided that Ryoma would be her victim due to his self-sacrificial nature. The others started to rely on Kurumi more due to her various skills, and while she helped Himiko and Anji prepare for the magic show, it gave Kurumi the opportunity to put the pieces in place for her plan. Kurumi invited Ryoma to his research lab and took his life when he had his back to her. Ryoma's body is nommed to death by a bunch of piranhas, finishing Kurumi's perfect murder plan. Though unfortunately for her, it wasn't as perfect as she thought. With evidence left in the pool, marks on the window panes, and scratches on the sink in Ryoma's research lab, Kurumi was caught as Ryoma's killer. Regardless of Kurumi's position in Japan's government, she is executed by Monokuma. Her execution, Strand of Agony, is one of my favourites in the whole series. It consists of Kurumi attempting to escape her execution by running away from an angry mob. She tries to climb up a vine covered in thorns. As the thorns dig into her hands, she's slashed by multiple sores. Covered in wounds, she weakly continues her climb. Eventually, she reaches the top, only to discover that the light she saw was actually a childlike drawing of the sky. The vine snaps, making her fall to the ground, making her attempts to escape completely useless. Her execution ends with the drawing falling onto her body, soaking up her blood. While I love this execution, I'm not a big fan of the case as a whole. I just felt like it was just trying to be the Chapter 2 case from the first two games, but it just missed the mark. I also find Kurumi to be a fairly uninteresting character. I think the whole president thing would have been a lot more interesting if it was introduced sooner, or if she lived for at least an extra chapter, kind of like how they introduced Maki's real talent. Generally, I do really like her design. I just feel like her character altogether wasn't particularly interesting. It almost feels like the writers wanted Kurumi to be similar to Peko, but it just wasn't quite right. That being said, I don't think the Mayor of Japan twist was necessarily bad. I just think it was introduced way too late into her screen time for it to be compelling. Much like every Chapter 3 in a Danganronpa killing game, there must be a double murder. The first of the two victims was Anji Yonaga, the ultimate artist.
Atua's on my side!
Anji is from a fictional island that worships a god named Atua. As Anji believed that she was receiving divine messages from Atua, she would act as the god's messenger, and as such would basically just control the people of the island. From the get-go, her backstory is certainly strange, but it isn't much of a surprise. As I've mentioned in the past parts, Danganronpa is certainly not a good series for representation, and unfortunately, Angie's just another example of that, which is just such a shame, as she could have been a really interesting character, but instead she was just a terrible stereotype of indigenous people. While Angie doesn't do much in the first chapter, she is notably very calm when faced with Amami and Kaide's deaths, praying for them so they would rest peacefully. In chapter 2, Angie befriends Himiko, and as a result, Himiko also believes in the Tua. I find their friendship to be very weird, as while Himiko finds Angie to be a comforting presence, I cannot help but feel that Angie is manipulating her here, as by chapter 3, she uses the bond she makes with others to basically rule over the rest of the students. Angie decides that the students should live in a school permanently, as this would end the killing game for good. In a way, she wants the killing game to become like her home island. As a way to convince the group to live in harmony in the school, her and Himiko put on a magic show, which of course goes horribly wrong. In the second trial, Angie is quick to accuse Himiko of being the Blackened. Her reason for this is that Atua told her that Himiko was the killer, though of course this isn't true. Considering that she and Himiko were very close, this shows that Angie is greatly distrustful of everyone, no matter what, which contrasts with her bright personality. I think there's a lot of similarities between her and Oma, and one of those is their loneliness. Oma isolates himself from others by villainizing himself, while Angie lets others get close to her, but internally she only really trusts herself. It's a really interesting duo to think of, and it makes me wish that Oma and Angie butted heads more in the story. In chapter 3, a new floor is unlocked for the students to explore. Angie's research lab is a bright, welcoming door in an otherwise eerie hallway. I know I've been analysing while I go instead of saving it all for the end of a character section like I usually do, but this just perfectly encapsulates who Angie is. She is a seemingly bright light in a dark place, though the door to her research lab can be locked, which suggests that she wants to keep her real self locked away from everyone. While in-game, it is said that her door has a lock on it and she can only focus on her artwork when she's alone, I think it also reflects on her lone wolf nature. I also like how the actual room is very monochromatic, which is exactly how Angie thinks. She is so blinded by her own delusions that to her, you're either a traitor or a follower, and that's about it. While I haven't talked much about the research labs in this video, I think they're a really nice addition to V3, and I wish they were used more in the trials. The third motive is a Necronomicon, which can revive one dead student. Angie takes it and announces her student council, which consists of herself, Himiko, Kibo, Sumugi, Tenko, and Gonta. The group's aim was to end the killing game by ruling over the rest of the students, with Angie as the president. This goes horribly wrong, as instead of being unified, the students are split into two groups, Angie's student council and everyone else. The council goes to more extreme measures to keep the students inside the school by blocking the manhole and smashing the flashback light, which just frustrates the remaining students. As a final effort to stop Angie from going through with the Necronomicon ritual, Tenko, Maki, and Saihara go to her research lab to reason with her, only to discover that she had created wax lookalikes of all the deceased students. This attempt is unsuccessful, but in the end, Angie is killed before the ceremony can take place. Angie is a character who has good intentions, but is just too distrustful of others, which is her biggest flaw. While I'm not the biggest fan of Angie, as she's just a little bit too much of a gaslighter for my liking, I do think she was an interesting character, but her death is quite anticlimactic. Similarly to Kurumi, I do think her story would have been more compelling if she either butted heads even more with the other students, or her storyline lasted a chapter longer. It's unfortunate that Angie was written so stereotypically, as she has a great design and she is a really interesting character, but in the end it just wasn't explored enough in the main story. I also feel like the writers forgot about her talent for a majority of the game, as it was rarely relevant to her character, which for Danganronpa is really strange. While Angie did get quite a lot of screen time in the chapters that she is in, I don't think it was enough for her to have a fulfilling character arc. With that being said, let's move on to the chapter's second victim, the ultimate Aikido master, Tenko Kabashira.
Himiko, hold on!
Tenko is our athlete girl of this game. She was sent to a temple at a young age as she was prone to temper tantrums. Tenko caused trouble for the priests of the temple, but this was resolved by the head priest who had her channel her energy through Neo-Aikido, a fictional Aikido style. The head priest used Neo-Aikido to teach Tenko to be a good person. For example, she would carry heavy items for the elderly as she believed that it would strengthen her Neo-Aikido spirit. While he taught her to have a good moral compass, he also convinced her to stay away from men, which resulted in her hating men completely, even though her father figure was a man. Her hatred of men is clear from the get-go. At the beginning of the game, she gets shy when Kaede compliments her, but when Saihara agrees, she calls him a degenerate male, which very quickly becomes her catchphrase. Tenko is quick to like Himiko, who she admires due to her magic abilities, but this isn't reciprocated. As Himiko gets closer to Angie, Tenko gets frustrated and jealous as she wants to be the one who's close friends with Himiko. She starts to distrust Angie due to the latter's lack of reaction to a dead body, which is pretty reasonable. While a lot of people write off Tenko as a single-minded man-hater, it's interesting to note how she greatly dislikes Angie and is on very good terms with Saihara, showing that her ideology isn't as black and white as everyone says it is. When Angie says that Himiko is the Blackened in Chapter 2, Tenko quickly comes to her defense, stating that she would believe in Himiko no matter what. This puts Himiko and Tenko in slightly better terms. In Chapter 3, Tenko's research lab is unlocked. This excites the Aikido fighter, who spars with Saihara and Himiko, but this results in them just getting yeeted on the floor. Tenko ends up joining the student council, but this is just so she can keep an eye on Himiko. As mentioned earlier, Tenko tries to convince Angie to not go through with the ritual. When they leave her lab, they see Himiko in the hallway. Tenko tries to convince Himiko that she's wrong, saying that she couldn't be a real mage if she had gotten brainwashed by Angie, but this only irritates Himiko. Tenko is unfazed by her anger, probably due to her own fiery nature, but she soon realises she had made a mistake. When the group finds Angie's body, Korekiyo suggests that they hold a seance so they could communicate with her spirit to figure out who was the Blackened. In the ritual, a female has to sit in the middle to act as the spirit medium. While Himiko offers to take this role, Tenko does it in her place. Before the ritual begins, she encourages Himiko to stay positive even in the wake of her friend's passing. This puts the two on good terms once more, but regardless, Tenko is killed during the ritual. Tenko is a character who feels almost every emotion very strongly, and as a result can come off as aggressively rude towards men, when in reality she is a very loving person who cares a lot about those around her. In a way, she's the complete opposite of Angie, even if the two both wanted the group to be united. To me, Tenko has always been a character that was meant to be similar to Asahina or Sakura, and just kind of missed the mark. I think out of all the characters in this cast, she's one of the ones who's the most obvious to be a filler character. That being said, I still appreciate her for who she is. I just wish that both the other characters and the fandom did the same. She is assumed to just be an over-the-top feminist, but she's so much more than that.
You think I'm dumb enough to swallow that line of crap?
Miyu Iruma is a victim of Chapter 4. She's the ultimate inventor. Iruma says that she used to be an unremarkable person, but after she woke up from a coma, she suddenly had loads of ideas for inventions. She quickly becomes a famous inventor. When we first meet Iruma, she quickly goes from 0 to 100. She is quick to call Saihara a pervert, but goes quiet when he argues back. Kaede doesn't recognise her, even though she is supposedly a famous inventor. Kaede leaves the conversation believing that Iruma was both an inventor and a lunatic. In Chapter 1, Iruma helps Kaede and Saihara with their plan by making the cameras, but the two have to plead with her before she agrees to help them. In the trial, Iruma is accused by Oma of being the killer due to the fact that she made the cameras, but this is quickly disproven. I really like how Iruma correctly guesses the killer of each case at the beginning of the trials, though unfortunately her accusations are ignored by the others. Once again, Iruma is deemed suspicious in the next trial, but thanks to her, critical thinking, she has an airtight alibi. In Chapter 3, Iruma upgrades Kibo in a completely normal way, giving him extra functions that could be used to the group's benefit in future cases. Iruma wasn't a part of Angie's council, but she spread a majority of Chapter 3 in the computer room where she started to work on the virtual world, which would be featured in the next chapter. Once again, Iruma immediately guesses the correct killer, as she believes that Korekiyo was the Blackened. Her activities from Chapter 3 properly come into play in the next chapter. She tells the group that they could use the program to escape the killing game. This, of course, was a lie. Iruma actually wanted to use the program to murder Oma, though of course this plan goes completely wrong. The two meet on the roof, but before Iruma could do anything, she was killed by Gonta. Oma had figured out that she had wanted to kill him, so he manipulated Gonta to do his bidding. And with that, Iruma became the victim of Chapter 4. I did like the Neo World program section of V3, even if it was really confusing. I will say, it did feel a bit like a copy of the Strawberry Grape House from the second game, but I still enjoyed it. I have a lot of mixed feelings towards Iruma, as while she has a cool design and is an interesting character, I cannot help but feel uncomfortable whenever she's on screen. It's pretty obvious that the writers absolutely hate her, which is a shame, as she could have still had a vulgar side to her, but instead it was taken way to the extreme. Iruma was a very useful character to the group, and was a strong personality in the cast as a whole. But in the end, It was only to her own detriment. Now we're on to the two surviving ladies of the killing game, and why not start strong with the ultimate assassin, Maki Harukawa.
They were gone before I can remember.
Maki was an orphan that was recruited by a cult, the Holy Salvation Society, to become an assassin. Originally, her childhood friend was meant to join the cult, but Maki volunteered in her place so her friend could have a good life. Very Katniss Everdeen of her. While this is her main talent, her caregiver talent isn't necessarily a lie, as she took care of the younger kids at the orphanage, though she only did this out of obligation. Maki was forced into a harsh training regime that broke her both mentally and physically. This made her numb to the point where she would just kill whoever she was ordered to without question. She later found out that her friend from the orphanage had died in an accident. Regardless, Maki continued to do her job to protect the orphanage. From the get-go, Maki is a very standoffish, stoic character who quickly becomes a lone wolf. This surprised the group as her personality was the opposite of what you would expect from an ultimate caregiver. In Chapter 2, Maki's research lab is unlocked. As her lab would reveal that she was actually the ultimate assassin, Maki would spend all of her time there to ensure that no one else would go inside. After they all receive their motive videos, Ryoma approaches Maki and tells her that he had received her video, and so he knew her true identity. He uses this to blackmail her so she would give him his own video. Maki agreed to this, basically solidifying Ryoma as the victim of the next case. At the end of the trial, Oma reveals to the group that Maki was actually the ultimate assassin. This incident was where Maki's hatred towards Oma truly began, and this isn't resolved until much later into the game. This part of the game is also when Kaito starts to get closer with Maki, as he is the one who's able to get her out of her room in Chapter 3, and he invites her to his and Saihara's workout sessions. While Maki didn't want to participate, Kaito practically forced her to stay. She girl bosses them with her super fast push-ups, and the Kaito, Maki, Saihara trio is born. I'll be honest, I wasn't too invested in this trio. I do like how unique this type of group is to a Danganronpa game, but I wasn't that invested in any of their characters, so all in all, this trio isn't bad, it's just not that interesting. In Chapter 3, Maki is greatly involved in the case. She stormed into the hangar determined to save Kaito. She is able to shoot Oma with a poisoned arrow, but before she can finish him off, Kaito steps between them, resulting in him also getting shot with a poisoned arrow. She got the antidote for the poison and handed it to Kaito through a small window, though Oma takes it and pretends to drink all of it. While Maki keeps her involvement in the case a secret, Sahara is able to deduce that she was at the scene of the crime. When they discover that Kaito was the Blackened, Maki is distraught. Maki confesses that he was the first person that she ever liked, but unfortunately they were out of time. In the end, Kaito was executed. It's refreshing to have the male counterpart of a couple be sacrificed instead of the female side, but again, I was just not invested enough in their relationship. To me, Kaito always had a saviour complex vibe about him, so I only really saw him and Maki as friends. I don't think the ship is bad at all, I'm just not that interested in it, so this moment didn't hit as much as it probably should have for me, but it's still a good moment for Maki's character, even if it is a little bit cliche. How many times have we seen a romance story that is centered around one character breaking the icy exterior of the other? That being said, I'm glad that Maki did get this moment, as without it, she would be a far less interesting character. In the wake of Kaito's death, Maki becomes determined to end the killing game once and for all. In the final trial, the nature of the killing game is revealed. I'll get more into this in Tsurugi's section, but she tells Maki that her and Kaito's relationship was always going to happen, as Team Danganronpa had predetermined the entire killing game. This causes Maki to break down, as she can no longer trust her own feelings. After the trial, the school is destroyed by Kibo. Maki, along with Sahara and Himiko, stand in the rubble, determined to discover their true selves. I will be getting more into the ending later, but I really like their final scene of the game, and it actually made me a little bit emotional when I first played it. They sort of became an odd found family, one that would stick together in this moment of uncertainness between them. While I wish that this trio was developed earlier in the story, I still appreciate them for what it is. All in all, I'm not the biggest fan of Maki, although to be completely honest, I'm just petty. Back when I first got into Danganronpa, I made an OC who was the ultimate assassin and had pretty much the exact same personality and backstory as Maki. Then V3 came out and I felt robbed. Jokes aside, I was in disbelief that I, a student who didn't know anything about character writing, wrote basically the same character that a team of professionals did. And ignoring my personal beef, I like how much the game explores Maki's relationships with the other characters, and I think she is a deserving survivor of V3. Although, I don't think that can be said about all the survivors. On that note, let's move on to the ultimate magician, Himiko Yumeno.
I decided to live life facing forward. 「 I decided to live life facing forward. 」 「I 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 decided to live life facing forward.」 「I decided to live life facing forward.」 「I decided to live life facing forward.」
Himiko was the apprentice of a skilled magician, who she trained under until she surpassed him in skill. Himiko constantly stresses that her magic is more than just parlor tricks, and that she is a mage and not a magician. Himiko seems to only be passionate about magic, and unless she's talking about the subject, she seems to be bored or even on the brink of taking a nap. Same bestie. As mentioned earlier, Tenko is quick to attempt to befriend Himiko, but she's just not having it. Himiko unlocks her research lab in chapter 2, the items from this lab being used in the magic show later in the chapter. Himiko starts to get closer to Angie, but regardless of this, Angie is quick to distrust Himiko in the trial. Regardless, Himiko still remains friends with Angie, to the point where she joins her student council. As I mentioned earlier, Tenko and Himiko get into a fight, making their relationship way worse than it was before. Tenko is then killed in Himiko's place, and Himiko feels incredibly guilty. She is more irritated than usual in the trial, and this only gets worse when she's accused of being the Blackened. When Oma deems Tenko's death as unimportant, Himiko is quick to retaliate, but Oma points out her hypocrisy, as Himiko didn't care for Tenko when she was alive. I really like this moment, as while Himiko had just sort of been a silly guy up until this point, this comment from Oma shows how Himiko is a pretty flawed person. While Tenko is constantly around her, Himiko is unnecessarily harsh towards her. I think this moment should be talked about more often, as while many in the fandom are quick to call Tenko an annoying feminist, not as many talk about Himiko's cruelty towards Tenko. Saihara helps Himiko find her resolve again by comparing her situation to his own with Kaide, and that if they gave up, their deaths would have been for nothing. After the trial, Himiko is distraught when Korekiyo reveals his reason for murder, as she couldn't believe that her closest friends were killed for such a stupid reason. Oma asks her why she's still holding back her emotions, and then, finally, Himiko completely breaks. She bursts into tears and mourns them. This makes the rest of the students cry alongside her. I want to really quickly address Himiko's dynamic with Oma, as in a rare, non-antagonizing moment from Oma, he actually encourages Himiko to express her emotions. The guy who supposedly is known for always lying inspired her to be true to herself. Interesting. Again, this just makes me wish that their dynamic was more prominent in the story, but regardless, I do think it's good to note. She enters chapter 4 with a new resolve in life, although apart from telling her left from her right by holding chopsticks and giving Kaito a disassembled crossbow, she isn't that prominent in the next couple chapters. So, I do like how Himiko is determined to become a better person thanks to her bonds with Angie and Tenko, but her character arc feels incomplete to me by the end of the game. Yes, she was able to be hopeful towards the future, but I just feel like her character loses steam after chapter 3. Himiko is cute, a bit lazy, and like the rest, has a great design, but unfortunately she's not really anything more than that, at least in my opinion. She is enjoyable on the surface, but sadly I think she was overshadowed by more compelling characters in the cast. Now it's time to talk about the mastermind of V3, so here we go. The ultimate cosplayer, Tsumugi Shirogane.
Hi, I'm Kaede Akamatsu.
Throughout the game, Tsumugi is a kind, friendly girl whose whole thing is that she isn't interesting, which, to be honest, is not a great start. So Tsumugi was the one who actually killed Amami in the first case, meaning that Kaede wasn't actually the Blackened. This is because Kaide's plan had actually failed, but Tsumugi swooped in and finished him off for her. I won't lie, I absolutely hate this twist. I never liked that Kaede was the killer in the first place, but the fact that she wasn't actually the killer at all, and Tsumugi, who was a far less interesting character, was actually the killer, was just so frustrating. She then reveals to the group that they are a part of a fictional series called Danganronpa, and that their backstory, talents, thoughts, feelings, and actions were all predetermined by Team Danganronpa. This included the flashback lights that revealed information such as the Gopher Project and Host Peak to the group. I haven't talked much about this at all up until this point, as I'm just not the biggest fan of this twist. It's an interesting twist for a killing game to have, but it's just so meta to the point where it just feels like Kodaka and the rest of the real Danganronpa team just absolutely hate their fans. And there's probably at least some truth to that. Although I do like how this twist allowed Tsumugi to cosplay as the better characters from the past games, which ironically was a great fanservice moment. Tsumugi is completely devoted to Danganronpa, to the point where she was willing to sacrifice herself so the series would continue. But in the end, the survivors are able to stop the killing game once and for all. While it is understandable that Tsumugi isn't as involved in the main story as the other characters are, it just made me find her really boring, and I still find her boring after the mastermind reveal. I'm sorry if you do enjoy her character. If you do, I'm genuinely really happy for you, as I wish I could see the light. But I just find her character to be completely unenjoyable. As expected, she goes out in a small thump as she gets squished by large pieces of debris alongside Monokuma. Tsumugi could have and should have been a great mastermind, but it almost feels like the writers didn't really try. She literally has to imitate past characters to be even remotely interesting, but in the end, I dislike pretty much everything about her character. It's a shame that Tsumugi was such a letdown as a mastermind, but at the very least, I do like her design, even if she does look a bit more like a librarian than a cosplayer. I would love to hear what you guys think about Tsumugi's character, as I might just be overlooking certain aspects of her character, but all in all, I just can't help but feel disappointed. I didn't mean for this video to end on such a sour note, but I was just not a big fan of the main plot twist in this game, and as a result, this game is my least favourite. That being said, there are some aspects of this game that are great. Kaede was a really fun protagonist, and the executions in this game were nail-bitingly intensive, but there are just so many issues with this game that I can't overlook. Monokuma's at his worst in this game, alongside his little abominations, and the cast overall pales in comparison to the cast of the first two games. While I do think the Women of Despair girls and Future in Despair arc are mostly compelling, I fortunately cannot say that about the V3 girls. Thank you so much for watching this video. Danganronpa has been a massive part of my life, and I've met so many incredible people thanks to the series, and while it is certainly a problematic series, I just can't help but have such a soft spot for it. Thank you all for watching this video. I'm not sure what I'll be covering in my next Women in Blank video, but we'll just both have to wait and see. Thank you all for watching this video, and I hope you all don't fall to despair. Until next time, guys, bye bye! きらめいて輝いて最後の君を見せてよもっと止まらないブルーブルーで節分踏み越え輝け I miss you 絶対的希望のバス停